I told you that I went from getting expelled in high school to becoming a Forbes 30 under 30. To really make you understand how that happened, I'm going to have to take you back to when I was 6 years old. My best friend and I did everything together. We dug worms out of the ground together. We carpooled to school together. We wore matching pajamas and had a sleepover every Friday night. We would oftentimes find ourselves at the flea market looking for games that we'd never heard of. Most of them had missing parts, had no rules, but that didn't matter because we were planning on chucking those out anyway and creating our own versions of the game. There were no secrets between us until one day there was one. My best friend was the most colorful, brave, bold child you could have ever imagined. She was the life of every gathering. But one day, the spark in her eye disappeared. She went from coming first in class to failing. I would oftentimes go to her house and find her asleep under the bed or behind a sofa. She said she was just playing a game. I was 6 years old. I didn't think much of it. Life went on. A couple of years later, as I became a teenager, I was told that I was now under the watchful eye of every matchmaker. I could no longer wear sleeveless clothes. I could no longer have male friends. I had to stop walking like a duck. I was told that I could no longer eat 4 servings of food at weddings. I saw my friends start to adapt to this life. They went from not caring about their hairy upper lips to getting blow dries every single day. I saw them start to dumb themselves down because they didn't want to be seen as too career-oriented. But I dreamt of more. I wanted more. I needed more. So inherently, being a bit of a rebellious spirit, I decided that I was going to continue eating those 4 servings of food. Act like a complete fool everywhere, and make sure I wasn't marriage material. In that process, I managed to brand myself as the worst kid that Convent of Jesus and Mary had seen in 30 years, and I managed to get myself expelled. I was certain that nobody would want me as a bahu now. But I was wrong. Shortly after, I was approached by a rishta auntie for the first time. In that moment, I was a bit out of the box in my thinking and moved a ring I was wearing from my middle finger to my ring finger and managed to escape her. It was quite thrilling, and I decided I was going to start playing a game with myself and the rishta aunties to see how many ways I could come up with not getting married. So the next time I went to a wedding, I wore 3 layers of clothes to seem overweight. The time after that, I took paint and literally covered my body in a darker color so that I'd be seen less attractive in the rishta auntie's eyes. While that's all fun and games, on the flip side, my friends had started to go through divorces. One of them was married to a gay man who only married her to cover his preferences. Another was approached by a matchmaker for the first time on the day of her father's funeral. The matchmaker thought that now that she didn't have a father taking care of her, she would need a husband and thought it appropriate to approach her on such a sensitive day. A third friend was married off 3 times by the time she turned 24, because each time the partner was unsuitable, her family found someone else for her. I wanted to do something about it, but who was I to say anything? While my friends were going through these experiences, I had managed to escape to the most taboo places of them all, art school in the United States. While I was in my freshman year, the childhood best friend I mentioned earlier came to visit. I'm not sure if it was the change of environment, a safe space, or what, but she finally opened up. I learned that my best friend, closest person in my life, had been abused by her brother and her cousin for 7 years of her life. I learned that later she had been abused by her tennis coach, but she didn't even find that painful, because if her family that was meant to be protecting her could do this to her, then what would a stranger owe her? She had been suffering in silence. She had not said a single word for 12 years to anybody for one reason. She didn't want to destroy her family. I can, even to this day, feel the pain of the moment that she told me what had happened to her. I vowed in that moment to myself that I was going to do something about it, but I just didn't know what it would be. Meanwhile, in art school, the stories around me had started to shape my art. I had taken these two extremes of my personality and turned them into illustrations. Illustrations that were playful yet meaningful, silly yet serious. But they felt a bit static. Something was missing. I needed a little bit more. And so I thought to myself, how can I create an experience that is fun, exciting, engaging, and interactive all at the same time? And then I thought, if a game like Monopoly, with no underlying emotion, can elicit such strong emotions and can literally cause family feuds, what would happen if you took the same medium and added a serious message to it? Would it still be fun to play? Would it still spark as much of a debate? So I started with the first thing I wanted to tackle: arranged marriages. My life had kind of been somewhat of a game, a cat and mouse chase rather, to avoid the Rishta auntie. So I started off by creating a list of every ridiculous thing I'd done to avoid her. And the ideas flowed pretty naturally. So did the game mechanics. The gameplay essentially involves a Rishta auntie chasing down 3 teenage girls and marrying them off to all the suitors she has at hand. The girls are moving away from her by doing things that would be considered scandalous in Pakistan. Meanwhile, the auntie is coming closer to these girls by, seeing things that may be considered great qualities, like you see a girl with childbearing hips, or you see a girl who can make a perfectly round roti. The auntie catching the girls is inevitable, and when she does so, she marries them off to the boys she has at hand. This game became an immediate success. It went pretty viral. I had honestly just created it to find humor in a situation I was going through, but I think it may have struck a nerve with women around the world that were going through something similar. It all seemed well and good, but on the flip side, my mum was dealing with a little bit of a nightmare. Everyone in our society came to her and said the sentence we loved the most: "Log kya kahenge?" But I lucked out because my mum cares even less than I do about what random aunties, uncles, society has to say. And every time she was criticized for letting me run wild, she would smile politely and say, "I don't see your daughter on the BBC." What I learned through this whole process was that how powerful games can be. I had been trying to talk about these subjects, but nobody had wanted to hear what I had to say. But then I took my underlying message and turned it into an exciting experience. And suddenly, people from all over wanted to play these games, wanted to be part of this experience, and I was able to get my message out to a wider audience. I knew now that I had to fulfill the promise I made to myself earlier. I want you to take a moment here and think about the 4 closest women in your life, be it your mum, your sister, your daughter, your wife. Now imagine the chances are that at least one of them has suffered from child abuse. And that's just from reported numbers. I'm sorry for getting a little bit heavy here, but there is some good news. Did you know that research actually shows that 95% of abuse is preventable through education? The moment I read that, I knew that that's what I needed to do. I needed to educate kids in a way that was sensitive and informative, playful and engaging. The research on this one was tough. I spent months doing it, and then after deliberating over it for months, the idea finally popped into my head. Kids love a good hunt, and that's exactly what they were going to do. They were going to hunt down some monsters that represent perpetrators. So the process is very simple. Along with their caregiver, they go through a basic body safety booklet that teaches them about consent, respect, good and bad touches, and forming a safety network. Once they do that, they're provided with a couple of toys, and 3 scenarios. One of these 3 scenarios is a monster. The child has to then figure out which one of the 3 is the monster, and when they do so, they flip it around. Here I wanted to bring in another aspect. More often than not, 93% of the time, perpetrators are actually known to the family. They don't use force. They use emotional coercion, bribes, tricks. And in this moment, I wanted kids to feel empowered to be able to escape these situations. So at this point, the child comes up with an excuse to escape. Their parent captures the monster for them, and they're left with 2 friends. After hundreds of rounds of playtest, I knew I finally had a tool to protect kids all over. I came across a really powerful statement in my research. It said, the more light we shine on child abuse, the less shadows there are for abusers to hide in. And that's exactly what Monster Hunt does. It brings the monsters out of the shadows and puts the cards on the table. I'm generally fueled by the stories around me. I can't watch somebody I love go through some sort of adversity and not do something about it. It's a problem, really. Oftentimes I butt my nose into places where I really shouldn't. But when I learned that I could use this outspoken nature of mine and actually channel it into a creative energy, I could actually create a whole new field of design, games for social impact. And to round it all off, because I created this new genre of design, I ended up on Forbes. And that's where Ismail saw me. I got the great romantic story I'd been waiting for my whole life. In fact, it was even more romantic than I imagined. I moved continents to be with him. He shut down a museum to propose to me. But that's a story for another time. I might be here at EO, but I don't really consider myself to be an entrepreneur. I lose money doing what I do. But really the reason I do it is because if it can change a few lives, it'll be worth it. In fact, if it can just change one child's life, it'll be worth it. So I'm here today with an ask. Educate your children. Be it through this game, be it through anything else. Please just educate them and try to make the world a slightly safer place. Designing Monster Hunt has been the biggest challenge I've taken on. But just last week, the childhood friend that I mentioned earlier, was playing this game with her daughter, and she messaged me saying, I'm sitting here crying as I read the rules for a game because I wish I had it when I was growing up. And honestly, that's all the motivation I need to keep going. Thank you.